Hypothesis 1. It is hard for people to live in rugged mountains. To test this hypothesis, we can overlay the map of population on a map of mountains. When we do that, we see that mountainous areas generally have few people living in them. Note that we made the population dots dark blue, so they are easier to compare with the brown upside-down V's that represent mountains. Mountains make life difficult in many ways. People can fall off steep cliffs. Landslides can damage houses. It's hard to drive tractors and other farm machines on steep land. Even goats do not like to graze on really steep slopes. Just getting around is not easy, because it's hard to build roads or railroads on steep land. Mountains also influence climate. High places are colder than surrounding lowlands. They usually get more rain and snow. Really high mountains stay cold, and the snow never melts. On the other hand, mountains can protect people from attack. It's hard for tanks and soldiers to move on steep slopes. Terrorists often hide in mountains because it's hard to attack them. In the image on the right, a road in the Andes Mountains of South America. Obviously, it would be hard to build factories or houses next to this road. You probably couldn't even build a gas station here. As a result, there are few people living here and very few dots in this area on the world map above. In the chapters on South America, Russia, and Europe, we'll explore other effects of the processes that build mountains. Here we just compared world maps and made a conclusion. Very few people live in areas with high mountains. Now, what hypothesis should we consider next? Hypothesis number 2. Most people do not want to live in really cold places. To test this hypothesis, we can overlay a map of cold places on our map of population. First, we need to make a decision, because there are different ways to define cold place. We could make a map that shows the lowest temperature, measured at different places. We could show the average temperature of the year, or just the coldest month. We could look at the effect of temperature on food plants, like corn or wheat. Corn needs about 90 frost-free days to get started, grow, and make corn. It turns out that the last definition of cold is the best for a geographic inquiry. On this map, our overlay is a blue color over the general areas where the summer season is not long enough or hot enough to grow grain crops like corn or wheat. You can clearly see that very few people live in places where it's too cold to grow grain. We could investigate each dot in the blue areas to see if there's a reasonable explanation. For example, many people in Norway make a living by fishing. They don't try to grow corn. In recent years, they also discovered oil in the shallow water near Norway. Some people now work as oil well drillers. Others transport oil. Still others build equipment for use in oil wells. Other parts of the world have different stories. For example, some people live near large metal mines in Siberia. In South America, many people live on a flat area high in the mountains. This area is called the Altiplano, which means high flat area in the local language. This high area is cooler and more comfortable than the hot rainforest near sea level. We will look at Russian miners and South American mountain people in other chapters. Here, our focus is on the global scale. The map on this page helps us see why few people live in large parts of Canada, Russia, and other northern countries. But the empty areas on the map are not all shaded blue. In other words, a map of growing season can help us explain part of the pattern of population, but not the whole pattern. When we do a geographic analysis, we should remember that the geographic patterns of most things are the result of many influences. This is an important principle. Very few geographic patterns are so simple that they have only one cause. You should remember that fact whenever someone tries to tell you that there's a single cause for something like business success, crime, poverty, or terrorism. Now, what hypothesis should we consider next? Hypothesis number 3. Few people live in places where there's not enough rain to grow food. To test this hypothesis, we can find a map of dry areas and overlay it on the population map. The tan color on this map shows deserts, areas that get very little rain or snow. In general, people do not seem to avoid dry areas. There are not many dots inside large deserts. If you look closely at the map, however, you can see that a few dry places have a lot of dots. Look at Southern California, for example. Millions of people are living in places that are too dry to grow crops without irrigation. The reason is hidden in the phrase, without irrigation. People in California pay a lot of money to bring water from distant mountains or rivers. You might also have seen a video or read a book about Egypt. It's where ancient people built pyramids. On this map, Egypt is a curving line of dots near the Nile River in northeast Africa. Other chapters in this book have more about water. The topic is important because control of water is a major cause of conflict. TV announcers often blame wars on crazy leaders. Many wars, however, actually start as arguments over resources like water or oil. In the picture on the right, this artificial river is part of the California Aqueduct System. The system uses dams to block rivers in high mountains. These dams make reservoirs, man-made lakes, to store water from melting snow. Then artificial rivers like this one and huge pipes bring the water to the fields and cities of California. Practical rule: if you don't understand the causes, you are less likely to win a war. Wars and terrorist attacks are like population in one important way. To understand where they occur in the world, you usually have to look at several causes, not just one. So what's next? Hypothesis number 4. If an area had a large population in the past, it probably still does. Populations tend to grow unless something really bad happens. Wars, diseases, and famines can kill a lot of people. So can natural disasters like earthquakes, floods, droughts, or volcanoes. These events, however, rarely reduce the population of an area for long. As a result, places that had large populations in the past, for whatever reason, are still likely to have a lot of people today. We can test this hypothesis by looking at maps of ancient cities. A clickable world map could let you show each group of cities separately. Here we'll combine several map layers to save space and printing costs. These layers show the top 10 cities for 3 time periods. The map also shows some important trading centers in the Middle Ages. Question: what does this map show us? Answer: most of the areas that had cities a long time ago still have a lot of people. Conditions that helped populations grow in ancient times, good soil, flat land, good trade connections, and so forth, have not changed. In Egypt, 80 million people now live in the Nile Valley. This is the same area where people built pyramids thousands of years ago. In modern China and India, hundreds of millions of people are now living on the same fertile plains that supported many cities in ancient times. The modern world, however, also has large numbers of people living in some places that did not have big cities in ancient times. For example, you can see groups of dots on each coast of North America. One group is near New York. Another group is around Los Angeles. There are areas of large population near cities like Lagos and Johannesburg in Africa. There are clusters of dots around cities like Bogota, Sao Paulo, and Buenos Aires in South America. Don't worry if you don't know where all these cities are right now. We'll look at them again in other chapters. There, you will explore why people live where they do on other continents. We do not want to clutter the main point of this chapter by going into details now. On this page, we just want to emphasize how a map of ancient cities is like the maps of mountains, short growing season, and dry areas. Each of these different maps can help us understand some of the modern map of population, but no single map can explain all of it. On the right, it says Ancient and Modern Cities, a clickable interactive world map that shows where ancient and modern populations are located. Hypothesis number 5. People can move to places where they think they will do better. Here's another fact that can affect the map of population. People can move. Suppose someone makes a new discovery or invention. When that happens, people often move to take advantage of it. Here's a simple example. Some people found gold in California in 1849. Many people decided to move there to look for gold. That's what they called the gold rush. Here's a more complicated but much more important example. People invented tractors and other farm machinery. With these machines, a few people could do jobs that required hundreds of workers using old tools. Many people lost jobs as farm workers. These people often moved to cities in order to look for new jobs. This process of rural to urban migration can help us understand the history of American cities like Detroit, Chicago, or Los Angeles. Today, it's still going on in China, India, Africa, and South America. Rural to urban migration is the movement of people from farms and small towns to large cities and their suburbs. Another important change was the invention of air conditioning. This made hot places more comfortable. In the United States, people moved to cities like Atlanta, Houston, Phoenix, and Los Angeles. Air conditioning also helped other hot places around the world. Can you think of other inventions that may have persuaded people to move to new places? Here again, we will not go into a lot of detail in this first chapter. We will simply note that the process of migration is important. It can help us understand the map of human population. Your history book can give you more details about people migrating to the United States. Personal note: you might not have to read about migration, however. Your own parents or grandparents might be able to tell you about the time when your family migrated. If you're sitting in a school in the United States, someone in your family probably moved from some other part of this world. On the graph on the right-hand side, it says, this symbol graph shows the number of people that moved to the United States from each continent during each decade, from 1830 to 2010. You can make this graph easier to read by coloring the boxes for each continent a different color. Hypothesis number 6. Overlaying several maps can help us understand a map pattern better. To test this hypothesis, we can overlay several of the maps that we have used so far. When we do that, we see that few people live in areas that are cold, dry, or steep. In other words, several conditions can explain the pattern of population better than any one condition. If you look closely, however, you can still see several areas that have very few dots but are not cold, dry, or steep. There must be more reasons why people decide not to live in certain areas. In other words, we need to think of even more hypotheses to test. We'll not keep doing this investigation right now. It would take a long time because the world pattern of population is a complicated topic. This is not surprising for 2 reasons. The world has a lot of people. It has more than 7 billion, remember? People have many different reasons for living where they do. With just a few maps, however, we have been able to identify large areas that seem to be too cold, too dry, or too steep. These areas add up to nearly half of the Earth's land area. These limits are not necessarily permanent. Someone could invent something that could really change things. For example, what would happen if someone discovered a kind of corn that can grow in places with only one warm month? What about building cities under heated domes? What if they find a way to make ocean water drinkable? If someone did any of these things, large numbers of people could live in areas that are nearly empty today. In other words, the world pattern of population depends on the tools and skills that people have. This leads to another important rule. If technology changes, maps of things like population and wealth might also change. Jobs and geography. This is one of the most important uses of geography. People study geography in order to predict where people might get richer when conditions change. Trained geographers often work as advisors for business leaders or government officials. These are high-paid jobs. Like any tool, map overlaying is good for some kinds of investigation, but it also has weaknesses. It is important to remember that we cannot always come to a conclusion after looking at just a few maps, but we can get a really good start. Map overlaying can help us rule out some obviously wrong answers. These are useful skills for business people, politicians, and voters.